Yeah, it's interesting what you said there, because in Pope Leo's new encyclical, one of the things he says, one of the dangers he points out, especially talking about artificial intelligence, is that we kind of absolutize just this one element of what it means, for example, to be human. It's all about intelligence, about, whereas, as you were saying, there are so many other aspects of us and the scriptures, whether it's the mystery, whether it's the miracles, whether it's, speaking to us at a much deeper level.
Yeah. I have a great appreciation for the technology and the technological revolution that has made accessible the Greek and the Hebrew, word studies, commentaries through Verbum, for example, and other sources too. The Ignatius Catholic Study Bible now has its app, and I have been using that a lot lately. At the same time, if people think that it's going to replace sitting down, prayerfully studying, reading
One, but
the Lectio Divina, I think they're wrong. I think that we are bombarded with so many sources of information that we have often neglected wisdom, the kind of timely technology that kind of eclipses the timeless truth, which is also good and beautiful and more powerful to change lives, and to affect culture.
As a fellow publisher of physical books, I think we realize that sometimes there's nothing better than holding a beautiful artifact in your hand and spending time with it.
In the States, I'm even hearing that in elementary schools where teachers have been teaching kids who have tablets, and have been attached to screens since they were 2 or 3 or 4, they recognize the need now to kind of detach from the technology and get them back to reading and writing, but also back to the real books, to put them back in their hands. And I think this is going to filter out through secondary schools all the way up to higher education as well, but not before we really go through a difficult time, because I do think that AI does threaten the humanities at the level of colleges and universities far more than we've seen thus far.
I mean, have you seen that a bit in the university in terms of the work that's being handed in and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we have certain criteria about Chat GPT, Grok, or whatever else, and we have detection devices, but it's not perfect. It's flawed, and so I've already suspected but couldn't prove, and so marks arise over my head, but we've been discussing it among the faculty, and so there is a division of sorts because the humanities and the sciences are different things, and they're teaching different subjects. And so to keep up with the sciences, and engineering, for example, and the payoff of AI, I think, is much greater there. And there are some benefits or dividends for the humanities too, but I think the risks, especially with regard to writing and with regard to careful writing and to editing,
but also writing that contains something of the person who's writing it.
That's right.
'Cause, sure, ChatGPT or whatever can put out a good summary of a bunch of facts, but in the end, it can't illustrate them with personal experience. It can't, call your attention to something because of something that happened to the person writing it. And I think, in a sense, us as editors as well, and those who publish it, we need to really sort of make sure that stays as the kind of highest.
Well, I have a friend who says that's because the algorithms are still relatively primitive. Yeah. And so it will come out sounding personal. If you want it to sound like you can make it sound like you more than what you might have written last night, Yeah. On the other hand, there is no way that surrogacy is going to replace parenthood. And I look upon this as a kind of intellectual surrogacy where you are leaning into inanimate technology to do what only the anima, the soul, the intellect, the will, the longing for beauty and truth and wonder and awe. These are things that are irreplaceable. And this is what Pope Leo is pointing to, that human beings made in the image and likeness of God are not mechanistic. They cannot be understood, nor can they express themselves adequately simply through, something that is highly technologized. And I do think he's right in seeing the continuity from the Industrial Revolution, which brought urbanization, which brought the factory system that replaced the extended families, which brought about a revolution. I'm not a Luddite. I drive a car. I'm not against motor cars like Tolkien might have been at one point, for maybe for some decent reasons too, you know. But at the same time, you know, technology, like the Industrial Revolution, comes with great benefits, but I would argue that it comes with even greater costs.